Yep, we're good.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, we're about live, yeah?
Yeah, we
Or
should be.
soon.
The stream should be on by now.
Okay, awesome. I'll just wait for it to show up on YouTube. Okay, nice. We are live indeed. Nice. Okay. Let's see the chat here. We got a couple, okay, got one viewer so far.
I joined as well.
Yeah, nice. Okay, I guess, shoot, we could just play a bit till more people show up.
Okay. Last
Okay.
time we played, I struggled with it
Yeah.
a bit. Now I found where to go instantly.
Nice. Yeah.
68.
Okay, so those of you joining in now, okay, nice. We got 7 people watching now, so let's get the show on the road. All right.
Lumiere lost sight of it, but
So okay, Chris, can you pop up the first slide?
Yep.
Yeah. Topic of today's live stream, guys. Gen Z Starbucks slave versus a Roman slave. Who actually had it worse? Now, I want to make one thing very clear, okay? Like every YouTuber, sometimes I say things for hyperbole, for entertainment, you know, for like just for dramatic flair's sake. I'm not doing that this live stream. This is meant to be a serious, objective, academically, rigorously studied analysis, okay, of who has it worse. You see on the screen right here, the guy on the left or that gal on the right. All right. Now you look at this on the surface level, obviously you're going to think the guy in the chains on the left, of course he has it worse, right? But I promise you, there's a lot more than meets the eye. A lot more. Because what have I told you? That the guy on the left, yeah? This guy could have probably bought his freedom and become a full free man by the time he was 30. Whereas the gal on the left, the modern day Gen Z wage slave, she's going to be working in that same place probably till 40, 50, 60 before she gets to retire. The guy on the left had 100 holidays off per year, got to feast with his masters. The gal on the left, 10 days off, if that. The guy on the left never once had to worry about food or shelter. Gal on the left has to deal with it every single day of her life. Yeah, there's a lot more than meets the eye, and yeah, we got a lot to cover. I recently made a video basically comparing like the Roman Empire UBI to the modern day economic system. A common rebuttal I got, which I was kind of expecting, is that, their labor was dependent on slave labor labor back then, which is why our modern system's so much better. I knew that critique was coming, and they walked right into a trap, because what they don't know is our modern day form of wage slavery at least is arguably worse. I think I can make a serious case it is worse. Again, this is not coming as a clickbaity YouTuber. This is coming from an actual legitimate, honest academic perspective, because I've done a lot of research for this. What was their term for their UBI? Kira Anona. I've done a lot of rigorous academic research for this. Now, I want this to be a serious discussion. So, if there are any like Roman expert historians who want to challenge or contest some of the claims I'm about to make, I absolutely welcome you to join in the discourse and correct me if I'm wrong about any of this. I'm not an expert, like a specialized expert on like Roman history by any means, but I did a lot of extensive research about this for my videos. So, yeah, we can get this show on the road. Yeah, can you go to the next slide, Chris? What's going on?
Oh, can you see it? Wait, it's gonna be, yeah.
Oh yeah. It'll, yeah. Okay. So, one thing you got to understand about Roman slavery, guys, is it was probably the most humane form of slavery in all of human history, of like actual legal slavery, I'm talking, and probably more humane than modern slavery, which you'll see by the end of this video. I'm going to give you a couple examples. Now, to be clear and fair, these are anecdotes, okay? These are examples of the best outcomes of it. But we'll address, the average outcomes later. But I want to give you these examples just as a context so you can understand the nuances of Roman slavery here. All right, so we'll begin with the story of Cicero and Tiro, okay? So, obviously this is a modern drawing of the two. Tiro's working on a computer, which they did not have back in the Roman Empire, but this is kind of just like a modern reenactment sketch. But let's talk about the actual story of Cicero and Tiro. By the way, Cicero was a very key philosopher that was like a lot of the principles that he had directly led to the founding of even American republicanism. All right. So Tiro was technically born a slave to like Cicero's family. All right. Born a slave. Cicero, about, we don't know, like Roman ages are a bit tricky to figure out. So we'll say like Cicero was about 10, 20 years older than Tiro. Cicero did not care one bit that Tiro was technically his slave. All right. He treated him as his best friend because, Cicero was legitimately talented in many ways and was useful to him. All right. They had an incredibly valuable business relationship for many years. Cicero legitimately cared for Tiro. Like when Tiro was sick, Cicero wrote a lot of affectionate letters to Tiro. This is well documented historical evidence. He legitimately cared for Tiro on a personal level, despite the fact that like Tiro was legally and technically a slave. He was only his slave by technicality. All right. But in terms of how he was actually treated from a practical standpoint, Cicero treated Tiro like an absolute best friend and far better than your modern day employer would treat you. Hey, philosophical gamer, AJ King, thanks for tuning in. You actually kind of low-key inspired the topic for today's live stream because you mentioned to me like wage slavery, modern day wage slavery is actually worse than chattel slavery. And I thought that was hyperbole at first, but when I really, really looked into the historical facts and evidence, there's a serious case to be made, which is what we're doing in this video. Now, Cicero freed Tiro when Tiro was about 50. And the only reason they waited that long is because, like, they had such a good working relationship anyways that, there wasn't even a need to free him from a practical standpoint. It's just that, like, they wanted to do it as a formality. It was a nice formality. Now, after Cicero died, okay, Tiro went on to almost live to 100 years old, which is insane for ancient times, okay? After Cicero died, Tiro went on to live 40, 50 more years. And if he hated his master, if they had like a traditional slave master relationship, he would have he would have pissed on his grave. He would have hated him forever. But that didn't happen. Cicero dedicated the entire rest of his life Tiro dedicated the rest of his life to preserving the work of his former master after his former master had died. He willingly did that after Cicero died. So that just gives you some context on just how tight of a bond they had, despite technically being a slave master relationship. Okay, can you go to the next slide?
Yep, I just went. It's gonna be there in a few seconds on stream.
Yeah. We'll wait a bit here. AJ King says, I would need an editor to grow my YouTube channel because right now I have to max my stuff on a solo channel. Can't do edits right now. Yeah. Hey, we might even be able to help with that. I'll message you on Discord. We'll discuss it. Okay. Now, speaking of Cicero, this is a direct quote from Cicero, okay? He made an absolute Cicero, like, okay, let me give you some context first. So in ancient Rome, right, wage labor really was rare, like very, very rare. Like the majority of the economy was people essentially owning their small businesses. People would have like, they'd be artisans, bakers, carpenters. People basically all owned their mini small business back then, right? The idea of corporations coming in, dominating everything, and the majority of people having to work for a wage for a corporation, unheard of in the Roman Empire, all right? Wage slavery was a very, very tiny fraction of the economy back then. Um, and this is what Cicero had to say about wage labor, okay? He said, and I quote, "Vulgar are the means of livelihood of all hired workmen whom we pay for mere manual labor, not for artistic skill. For in their case, the very wage they receive is a pledge of their slavery." Like, he's literally calling this wage slavery long before the term existed in the modern sense. Now, to give you some more context on just how poignant this is, okay? In the modern day, it's very easy to critique wage slavery because it's all in front of our faces and in our experiences every day as we speak. It's impossible to avoid it, right? Like most of us have to work for a wage still. The majority of labor now is wage labor. So it's very easy when it's constantly being shoved into our faces. Not to mention, of course, our asshole boomer parents are constantly pressuring us to work for a wage. So when it's so in our face all the time in the modern day and age, like, of course, it's easy to you can go play Claire Obscure if you want to be, Chris. In the modern day and age, okay, super easy to critique wage slavery because it's in our face all the time, right? The point here is back then, wage labor was a very, very tiny percentage of overall labor done, which means for him to go out of his way to critique it, it must have been something really, really bad, something really, really diabolical that he would go out of his way to critique it at a time when it was a very tiny percent of the overall labor force. And yeah, this was a guy also, by the way, who owned his own slaves. He saw the worst of Roman slavery. He probably saw Roman slaves on the farms being, abused and beaten. He probably even saw Roman slaves in the mines being worked to death, although the mines weren't really slaves. That's a bit of a historical misunderstanding, but that's probably another topic. This guy saw all the worst forms of slavery in ancient Rome, okay? And what he went out of his way to criticize was wage labor. And he directly compared it to slavery, all right? So that should give you some context on just how reprehensible the ancient Romans viewed working for a wage. And I would say rightfully so. Okay, can you go to the next slide? You pop up the next slide. Let me know when it's there. Yo, Chris, are you here?
Yep, sorry, my mic was off. Can you see it now?
Yeah, I can see it now. Okay, cool. All right, next we're going to move on to a quote from Seneca, okay? Now, to be clear, these are anecdotes, right? But I will shortly explain why these anecdotes actually matter. So this is from Seneca. You've probably heard of him. Most people have heard of Seneca. I am glad. Okay, someone says, can we do a picture-in-picture? Actually, good idea. Would that be possible, Chris?
Picture
Do a
in
picture. Like maybe have it
to
in
the whole screen, pretty
the.
much.
See if you can figure it out. If not, not a big deal. But
Okay, yeah, it
yeah,
should
see
be
if you
good
can
now.
figure it out. Yeah. Okay. So Seneca directly said, this is a direct quote from Seneca, who you've heard of. "I'm glad to learn through those who come from you that you live on friendly terms with your slaves. This befits a sensible and well-educated man like yourself. They are slaves, people declare. Nay, rather they are men. Slaves? No, comrades. Slaves? No. They are unpretentious friends. Slaves? No. They are our fellow slaves. If one reflects that fortune has equal rights over slaves and free men alike." All right. Now, the reason, yes, this is an anecdote, but the reason this is a historically significant anecdote is because the most common rebuttal which we'll shortly delve into, is that, oh, Roman slaves, they had no legal protections, they had no personhoods, they could get beaten, they could get killed, and there's nothing they could do about it. Okay, from a legal standpoint, yes, that is true. And that actually happened, to be fair, relatively often early on in the empire, but towards like the Pax Romana, towards like, the second century onwards, like beating and abuse of slaves significantly declined. Like if you read writings from early in the empire, you'll see like writers talk about, beatings very casually. As time goes on towards the Pax Romana, you'll notice more and more writings like this from Seneca, where influential writers of ancient Rome, start to talk about beating of slaves in a very, very negative light. And this had a direct result on actual policy, because later on in the Roman Empire, actual emperors started to implement laws that first there was a law that banned the outright killing of slaves. And then there was a law that banned the abuse of slaves. And then there was a law that allowed slaves to actually seek asylum from abusive owners. And owners could actually be punished for abusing slaves excessively, and they could be forced to sell off their slaves. Slaves could live in an asylum till they got a newer, nicer owner. So there were more protections for slaves than you thought in ancient Rome. Yes, beatings did happen, but they happen a lot less common than you think, especially when it comes to the urban Roman slaves. All right. Okay, cool. Can you go to the next slide, Chris?
Yep, I'm at the next slide.
Yeah. What also sucks in modern time as opposed to Rome, we can't just walk up to someone and ask to be an apprentice or something. Very good point. We're actually going to talk about this a lot very soon. Okay, so again, I've thought about this very, very clearly and very extensively, and did a lot of extensive historical research in this. All right, because I want this to be actually taken seriously by academics, by professionals. I'm actually making a serious case, not a clickbaity YouTuber case, that modern day wage slavery is worse than Roman slavery. Okay. And Chris, I think that the it's a bit off center. See if you can fix that. Not a huge deal, but I think the title's a bit cut off. Anyway, so
Okay. Yeah,
the way I've compartmentalized this, all right, the way I'm gonna make the case to you that Roman slavery was better, maybe better is the wrong word to use. Let's say modern slavery is worse than Roman slavery. All right, I've compartmentalized and broken it down into 6 different variables, 6 different factors, or okay, 5, but there's a 6th one which I'll talk about towards the end here. So we'll just say the 5 for now. The 5 variables, the 5 factors, okay, that I've broken it down to, which we're going to go through one by one. Okay, incentive structure, size and scope, peak cruelty, right? Working conditions, and the psychological factor. All right. And yeah, as you'll soon see, once we go through the list and explore all these in nuance, the picture will become a lot more clear. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Okay, we're there.
Yeah. So let's talk about the incentive structure. All right. So what a lot of people will say as an instant knee-jerk rebuttal is, oh, how can you even compare it to Roman slaves? They had no legal rights. They had no personhood. They could get beaten. They could get killed. Technically, all that's true, right? They could technically get beaten or killed with no legal protections. Like if a Roman master beat his slave to death or killed him, there would be no legal consequences for that, at least early on in the empire. Later on, they did actually even make some rules to stop that. But that didn't happen often at all. And I can easily explain to you why. It all has to do with incentive structures, all right? So the way modern slavery is set up, okay? Modern slavery is economic slavery with legal protections, all right? Legal limits, all right? So what I mean by this is, what keeps you working at a job you hate in the modern day? Well, the boss doesn't legally own you, right? He can't force you to work there from a legal standpoint. You're enslaved, however, through economic incentives. Because if you don't work, if you quit your job, if you don't do a good job, you're not legally bound to your job, but you can't quit because you'll go homeless and starve if you do. All right. Everyone's lived through that experience. Don't need me to explain it any further than I already have. All right. So we have legal protections, but we're enslaved via economics. All right. Roman slavery and most historical slavery was the exact opposite. All right. Slavery was legal. Well, I shouldn't say most historical slavery. Let me just keep it within the bounds of Roman slavery here. Okay. Um, Roman slavery, on the other hand, slavery was a legal institute, but they had key economic protections. All right. And that was because a Roman slave master had to invest a significant amount of money to buy a slave. How much exactly depended on the type of slave, but generally speaking, even for like a lower class wage, a low skilled wage, it probably cost at least 1, 2 years of wages. All right. And if you wanted to buy like one of the Greek slaves, especially like one of the more higher class skilled slaves, oh, that could cost you 5, 10 years of wages. All right. Now, this is going to have implications on how you treat your slaves. All right. Even if there's no legal protections, if you have to invest that much money in a slave, right? Whereas modern day slave owners, they don't have to pay anything to invest in your labor, right? It's the opposite now. Like you have to invest 5 years and $50,000 in a college degree to get a job. Like you're like, it's so fucked up now. Back then, they invested money in you for your slave owner. Today, you're the slave, and you have to pay to be a slave. That's how backwards it is. So the ramifications of this are huge. All right, in how you're going to get treated. Chris, can you go to the next slide?
Yes.
Okay, so generally speaking, okay, in life, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, shoot. Can you I think I fudged the order a bit. Can you go forward 2 slides? My bad.
Yeah,
Generally
once.
speaking, there are exceptions. Generally speaking, however, economic incentives in life are going to be stronger than legal incentives. Try to find the slide of the guy punching his laptop. Yeah. Go back one. Sorry, go back
Yep,
one.
I think I
Generally
have one.
speaking, economic incentives are going to be stronger than legal incentives. And let me give you an example. Okay, so I spent about, let's say, a month's worth of wages on my laptop. Okay, not remotely close to how much a Roman slave owner would have had to pay for a slave. Now, a laptop, okay, I don't want to call it a slave, all right, but economically it functions very similar to a slave, right? It's my property, it works when I want, it can't refuse. I mean, it doesn't need to because it doesn't have feelings, emotions, needs, whatever, but economically it functions similarly to a slave. Okay, like it doesn't have any legal rights, it doesn't have any protections. I could beat the shit out of my laptop right now, I could punch a hole through it like that guy you see in the picture right there, I could smash it, I could effectively like kill it, right? I could legally do that. So why don't I? Well, because my laptop has economic protections, right? I invested a pretty hefty amount of money into it. I have all my work saved on here. If I broke it, I'd have to buy a whole new one, and explain to it everything I do with my videos and my, live streams that I'm sharing with you. It has, because I financially invested into it, right? It has economic protections where even if it doesn't have legal ones. And these economic incentives are very strong, right? In the same way, like, okay, those of you who own a car, right? That's probably more comparable, actually. You probably have to work at least 1, 2, 5 years worth of wages to get a car. All right. You can legally bomb your own car if you want. You're not going to do that. You could vandalize your car, beat your own car if you want. You're generally not going to do that because you invested a lot into it economically. All right. I hope that makes sense. Economic incentives are generally going to be stronger than legal ones. Can you go to the next slide, Chris?
Yes, 1 second.
Uh,
You mean this one?
with a lot of computers there.
Oh, wait, yeah, okay. I'm in it.
Okay. Let's imagine for an instance. All right. I think you skipped forward one. Yeah, try to go to the one with the computers. Yeah, good. Okay, perfect. Okay, let's imagine for a second in a hypothetical alternate universe, it was reversed. Okay, let's say for whatever reason, a bunch of laptops just somehow either they fall from the sky, they get mass produced, or we go to war with a country with a bunch of laptops and we take over, and now we have like basically unlimited laptops for everyone, right? And let's say like the government steps in and says, okay, everyone gets laptops for free now. Unlimited laptops, as many laptops as you want. There's like no scarcity here, so you can have as many laptops as you want. But we don't want you like beating or killing your own laptops, right? Because, we just think that's barbaric. All right. So we're going to implement a fine. Like, we'll give you as many free laptops as you want. Okay. But we're going to implement a fine to where like we're going to fine you if we catch you beating your laptop. All right. Do you think that's actually going to stop that many people from beating their laptops when they get frustrated at it? Not really, if they know they can just get a new one, right? Like, and that's how modern day wage slavery works. All right. Because the employer doesn't have to invest anything in you, you're completely disposable, you're completely replaceable at a moment's notice. And so, even if you have legal protections, they're not going to be nearly as strong as economic protections are, right? For the simple fact that the police aren't going to follow you everywhere you go in life. I get modern day surveillance systems are becoming more draconian, but still, like it's like legal protections actually often backfire. We saw with prohibition, they tried to ban alcohol, people started drinking more, right? So they had to reverse the ban even. So not only are legal protections generally weak in many cases, in a lot of cases they even backfire. And so I hope everybody following? Like, does this make sense to everybody? That, like, generally speaking, economic incentives and protections are going to be stronger than legal ones. And therefore, because we have because our system, we're not protected economically, and Roman slaves were, and economic protections generally trump legal protections. That's an inherent feature of why Roman slavery was not as bad as modern slavery. Okay, Chris, I'm really sorry I fudged up the order. Can you go back to the slide that says Roman slave distribution and where I have the percentages?
Yep, I'm there right now.
Okay, cool. Okay, so one critique that I think I'm probably gonna get, so I'm just gonna address it right now, right off the bat, is people have often said, "Oh, you're talking about the urban slaves that lived in the cities, right? Those were the lucky ones. You're cherry picking. It was a tiny minority of the slaves who lived that well. Most slaves, they lived on farms. They worked on farms in far more brutal conditions. It was a tiny minority you're talking about. You're just dishonestly cherry picking." Well, here's what the actual facts and evidence that most historians generally agree on. About 30 to 40% were urban slaves. About 60% were agricultural slaves. It's impossible to know the exact percentage because, so many historical records have been lost. It did happen, over 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago at this point. So it's impossible to know an exact percentage. What are the other 0 to 10%? Okay, this is where we're going to talk about the slaves in the mine for a second. All right. This is what people mostly think of when they think of Roman slaves. This is the slaves in the mines. That's a bit historically ignorant. Those slaves were not exactly slaves. They were like war criminals, just, criminals in general. Like, people were sent to the mines as a death sentence. They were not like traditional slaves you saw at a slave market that you purchased from. So it's not even accurate to call them slaves in general. But that's generally, when people think Roman slaves, that's generally the first thing that comes to mind. And, through no fault of their own, that's kind of just like what gets sensationalized the most through the media. But those were not really representative of slaves at all. Those were more criminals and like war prisoners there, or enemies of the state and whatnot. So generally speaking, okay, urban slaves, let's just say 35%. All right, let's just say it's 35 urban slaves, 65 agricultural slaves. Let's like meet down the middle of the estimates. So when people say, "Oh, it was a tiny percent that were urban slaves," they're actually being dishonest here, okay? Because yes, it was technically a minority, but when they say it was a tiny minority, okay, who actually thinks 35% is a tiny minority? Like, if I told you the term tiny minority, does your mind think 30%? Or does it more think something like 1, 2, 5, 10%? I don't know about you, but when I hear the term tiny minority, I'm thinking it's at most 10%, right? I don't think of like 30, 35, 40% as a tiny minority. So it wasn't the majority, but it wasn't a tiny minority either. All right, to be completely fair. Okay. So, that's actually a decent percentage of the overall slave population. Now, let's talk about the 60% agricultural slaves for a second, okay? Because they matter too, right? And we got to be fair and historically honest here. Absolutely, they had it far worse. So why am I not using them as a baseline for comparison here? Well, because you have to be fair and compare like to like, right? When we're comparing like different eras, different systems, like we compare the best to the best, the average to the average, the worst to the worst, right? We don't say like communism is a superior system because Kim Jong-un lives a better life than like an average Gen Z from working at Starbucks, right? We have to compare honestly like to like. Miss Case's wait, is that a bit debate? You guys are getting it. You're really getting it now. All right. Okay, can you flip to the next slide, Chris?
Yep, 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, should be here.
Okay, so the reason I'm not talking about Roman agricultural slaves is because if you want to compare Roman agricultural slaves, you have to compare it to migrant agricultural workers today. All right. I don't know if you guys didn't know this. Your food from the grocery store does not just magically fall from the sky. You probably don't know of anyone who works in a farm personally, but someone clearly works on farms, which is how you see food in the grocery store. It doesn't just magically appear there, right? Most of agriculture labor today is reliant on migrant agricultural labor, all right? And they work in absolutely horrible conditions too, especially under this administration, all right? Migrant agricultural workers today, all right, which are wage slaves of, you know, the equivalent of Roman agricultural slaves in the modern day, they work for less than minimum wage, no legal protections. They can be deported at any moment. They can be locked in an ICE facility at any moment, right? Which I'm not even going to get into the absolute horrors that happen there. They have no rights or due process, all right? So, like, what's worse, like, you know, being beaten as a Roman slave or being locked in an ICE facility, no rights, no due process? You know, you're getting moldy, filthy sandwiches, you're locked in solitary confinement, especially under this administration. What's worse? Well, it's at least equivalent, I think. I wouldn't say it's like super definitive that like a Roman slave had it worse. You can make a case for either, but it's relatively equal, right? So that's why I'm not focused on agricultural slaves, because if you want to do a comparison video where we can do Roman agricultural slaves compared to migrant agricultural workers, we can absolutely do that in the future. Okay. But I think the more relevant example for most of us right now, you know, in the audience and for myself is comparing, you know, a Starbucks worker, a modern day Starbucks worker with, you know, with a Roman slave, with an urban Roman slave, right? So compare like to like. Let's be historically honest. Let's compare similar levels here. All right. A Starbucks slave is generally on the same level as an urban slave in ancient Rome. Okay. Okay. I hope that clarification and parameter is something we can all agree on. Okay. Can you move to the next slide, Chris?
Yes, 1 second, please.
Being in USA, I'm glad I am in socialist Estonia. Is Estonia socialist? Well, I know what it is. Like the good parts of it are okay. Well, I'll rant about that a bit later. Okay, so we talked about incentive structure. That's my first reason that I think we have it worse than Roman slaves. All right. Second reason is because size and scope. Okay, so let me put it this to you this way. This is the classic, like, you know, 100 horse-sized duck versus one duck-sized horse dilemma, right? Let's say like okay, you can either let me pose this thought experiment to you. What do you think would be worse? Like slapping a bunch of people in the face really hard? Like what would be worse? Slapping really hard 100 people in the face or punching 10 people in the face with a closed fist? All right? From an absolute standpoint, if we compare it 1-to-1, right? Punching one person in the face is absolutely worse than slapping someone in the face. Okay. But if I slap 100 people in the face, well, that's going to be worse than punching 10, because even though the absolute result is worse on an individual basis, because I'm doing it to so many more people, On an overall macro level, it's much worse to slap 100 people in the face than to punch 10 people in the face. All right. Basic example here, but you guys get the point. So when we talk about size and scope, okay, only about 20% of the Roman population were slaves. All right. Now, let me give some context on the general Roman economy. Most people back then, they owned their own equivalent of some small business. Like they were their own carpenters, they opened a baker shop, they were artisans, craftsmen, whatever. Okay. Like there were a bunch of occupations back then, but people mostly owned their own small businesses back then. All right. The idea of working for a wage for a corporation, totally unheard of back then. Okay. It's only recently in modern capitalism where we got like a bunch of corpos coming in and like controlling all the labor, right? Most people worked for themselves back then. So 20% of the Roman population were slaves. Okay. Today, well, technically 90% plus of people rely on wage labor. Okay. But again, let's be fair and honest here. Let's not be hyperbolic. Let's not be clickbaity. Okay. I wouldn't honestly say 90% of people are wage slaves because some people make enough money. They could quit. They could take some time off. They could try to search for a new job. That's mostly like boomers and Gen Xers who got the better of the economy earlier on. For us, Gen Z and millennials, most of us are living paycheck to paycheck. Okay. So, and this is according to statistics, by the way. 50% of people today live paycheck to paycheck. Overwhelming majority of that is us Gen Z millennials. That's just a fact. So, can we reasonably agree that if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you are a slave to your wage? Like, I don't think that should be remotely controversial because you're being enforced via economic enforcement, economic coercion to work, right? You can legally quit, but if you quit, you go on the you go homeless, you go and starve on the street. Okay, so 50% of us live paycheck to paycheck. All right, it's safe to say if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't just quit your job. You are economically enslaved. All right, now the consequences of living paycheck to paycheck. Okay, you're constantly under the threat. Like, what's keeping you working? What's keeping you working at a miserable job you hate? Well, the threat of homelessness and starvation, right? That's what keeps you in line. What kept the Roman slaves in line? Well, they were under the threat of being beaten, right? If they didn't work, okay? Now, out of the urban Roman slave population, it is an estimate, okay? It's hard to get an exact number on this, but generally speaking, historians agree around 10% of urban slaves, especially during the Pax Romana period, only about 10% were actually consistently beaten, all right? That's if you got a really, really bad slave master. There's a number of reasons for this. One, economic incentive protections, right? You beat your slave, he can't do work, and you lose your economic investment, number one. Number two, the elites lived in like very close quarters. They constantly had guests. Even if you could legally beat your slaves, it just was seen as very barbaric and not, it was just not a good look. Like it'd be like today, you can technically punch your walls, right? You can. Legally, you can. Like there's nothing stopping you from punching your own walls. But if you do that, your neighbors are going to think you're a bit crazy. And, Romans had guests over all the time. So if you're having guests over all the time, right, you're not going to just randomly punch your walls when your guests are visiting, just because it's not a good look, all right, even if you legally can do it. So because of that, because of economic and societal protections, a very small minority of the urban Roman slave, it was different on the farms, okay, but out of the urban Roman slave population, only 10, 15, maybe 20% at best were beaten. Whereas in the modern day, 100% of us living paycheck to paycheck are under the constant threat of going homeless and starving. Now, what's worse? Okay, being thrown on the streets to starve or being beaten? Well, I think they're at least equivalent. If you want to make the case that being beaten is slightly worse, okay, let's say I give you that, all right? It's still, modern slavery is still worse because of sheer size and scope. If only 10% of them were beaten, but 100% of us are under the threat of homelessness and starvation, it's worse for the simple fact that more of us have to suffer the consequences. Okay? Whew, okay, hope that makes sense to everybody. So 50%, okay, let's say 50% of workers today, yeah, 10% of the Roman population were actually beaten. 50% of us today living paycheck to paycheck are under constant threat of homelessness and starvation. All right. So we're talking about 7 million people beaten versus 100 million in the US, let's say, under the threat of starvation. All right. So this is a 10% versus 30% percentage wise. So just from a percentage size and scope standpoint, modern slavery is straight up worse than Roman slavery. All right. These are just facts and numbers. Okay. Can we move on to the next slide, Chris?
Just 1 second. Okay, we're
Sorry,
there.
sorry, I'm not giving you many chances to play here. The slide's flowing a bit better than I expected.
Yeah, don't worry, it's good.
Okay, now the third factor we're going to talk about is peak cruelty. Okay, like what was the absolute worst outcome in each scenario? All right, this is where I'm going to make a concession. To be fair, okay, to be fair, I do think the absolute worst possible outcome of Roman slavery was, being tortured and beaten to death. This did happen. Okay. There's no excusing it. Absolutely human rights violation. And as much as I'm a fan of the Roman Empire, like we have to be fair and criticize them fairly where they did things they probably shouldn't have done. Not probably, they definitely shouldn't have done. Right. So, and this is where people like usually automatically default to when they try to scream at you, oh, how can you compare today to Roman slavery? It was so much worse back then. They got actually tortured and beaten to death, right? Typical instant response you'll get from boomers if you try to compare the two. I will concede that the absolute peak cruelty is worse, but that's the best argument the other side has. And it's not even that much worse. Okay. So it's the only argument they have, and it's not even a good argument not even a great argument. I'll give it to them. Basically, like I'll concede this argument to them, to be fair, but they don't win that argument as much as they think they do because peak cruelty in modern day wage slavery is almost as bad. Not quite as bad, I'd say, but almost as bad. Because the worst thing, let's say, that can happen in the modern day, well, a lot of people get sick. They get cancer from work-related stress. It's scientifically proven work causes, these health problems. All right. And then they get fired. They get thrown off their health insurance. They're left to fend for themselves. Companies always, all the time, fire people for having cancer now after they gave them cancer. Okay. That happens. That does happen in the modern day and age. Literally, no one can deny it. Okay. Now, which one's worse? Getting beaten and tortured to death or, getting cancer from your job and then your job firing you and throwing you off your health insurance? Well, I'm going to be fair and say probably being tortured and beaten to death is worse, okay? But not by much, all right? Because it can happen any moment. It's much more visceral. With the second bad outcome, at least you get to live some time and potentially enjoy life before that happens, okay? So because it happens more slowly, I'll concede here that in this particular aspect, the one thing, defenders of the system love to hang their hat on, in this one aspect, modern slavery is not as bad, but it's still very, very close, okay? Which is the whole point. Even their best argument is not as big of a gap as they think, okay? And as you'll soon see, every other single argument, Roman slaves had it way better than we do. Okay, let's move on to the next slide.
Okay, we're there.
Here in Denmark, boomers usually say they had it worse back then because we have so much stuff today in tech compared to what they had back then. I have two responses to this, but let me finish up this presentation and then I'll answer some questions. Okay, so the next variable we're going to talk about, working conditions. Okay, this is where Roman slavery wins in an absolute, unquestionable, indisputable landslide. All right. Anyone want to fact check me on this? You can. All right. I did a lot of extensive historical research on this. Maybe I'm getting like 1 hour off here or there, one holiday off here or there. Like maybe I'm missing like 1 or 2 percentage points here or there. And like Roman historical records are not perfect. Like a lot of them haven't stood through the test of time. You can debate me on semantics on like maybe 1-2 hours here and there, but the general point is indisputable. Okay. So Roman slaves, urban Roman slaves, okay, 6 hours per day on average. All right. They would wake up, do a morning shift. They had a 3-hour midday nap called a siesta. This still happens. This is still a tradition that happens in Italy to this day. All right. If you visit Italy, you'll see people, shops close around 3 hours midday. People go back for a nap, whatever. Then they come back and they finish up their last 3 hours. All right. So generally, they worked about 6 hours per day. Some people, can give an upper estimate of maybe 7. So fine. If you want to like argue with me about it was 7 instead of 6, whatever, I don't care. Versus today, okay, we're working at least 10, 12 hours. I mean, technically it's a 9 to 5. Let's be honest. Most of us have to work more than a 9 to 5 to pay for these absurd cost of living now, not to mention the commute, right? Like commutes probably take like at least an hour of our day, whereas commuting did not exist at all in the Roman Empire. You lived in the same house as your master, your workplace was the same place as your living quarters. So they didn't have to commute. Roman slaves, along with Roman citizens in general, 100 holidays per year. All right. Documented historical fact. Look it up. Fact check me on this if you want. Again, you could argue maybe some historians said it was 80, some said it was 90, some might have said it was 120, 130. You can try to debate exact numbers if you want. All right. But you can't make an argument that it was less than what we have today, that they didn't have far more holidays than they did back then. All right, compared to today, 2 weeks if you're an American, maybe 6 if you're European, right? Like, yeah, Europe's a bit better with the stuff 4 to 6 weeks. None of us have remotely close to the off days a Roman slave had. And that's indisputable. Now, very interesting historical fact here. Saturnalia, guys. I think this was, one of, if not the biggest Roman holiday. It was a 5-6 day festival in December. Slaves, they did something hilarious back then, all right, which you would never see today. They had a role reversal role play back then where the slaves would get to be the masters during Saturnalia and the masters would be the slaves. Like the slaves could openly mock their masters. They could say whatever the fuck they wanted about them. The masters would actually serve slaves food. Like the masters would serve the slaves as if they were slaves and the slaves were the masters. Like they did that just for fun, also as sort of a release valve, because like after the Spartacus rebellion, they got a bit scared of slaves. I don't have time to get into the whole Spartacus rebellion. It was like a huge slave rebellion happened that was a huge threat to the whole Roman Empire. So they implemented a lot of safety valve release valve features then that made slave life a lot easier. One of them was Saturnalia, where they actually reversed roles. Imagine it'd be like this. Okay, so for like 1 week in December, imagine if your boss told me, okay, this week you're the boss, I'm your worker. You can talk to me the way I talk to you. You can control me. You can pay me the way you want. Like it'd be unthinkable today because today like the corporate structure is such like a narcissist power tripping shit show, right? So that just shows you their general mentality around slavery back then and how it was actually so much better than what we have today. Now let's talk about their next big safety valve feature, which is manumission. All right. Those of you who don't know, manumission, formal legal term in the Roman Empire, which meant the process of actually buying your own freedom and becoming a freed man or woman. Okay. Manumission is another safety valve feature they introduced to give slaves some hope and motivation to where by the time, generally between ages of 30 to 35, if they did their slave labor, well, they could buy their own freedom at that point. All right. They didn't really even have to buy their freedom in a lot of cases, but okay, just to make the explanation easier, let's just say they were able to buy their own freedom around 30 to 35. Okay. Overwhelming majority of urban Roman slaves achieved manumission between the ages of 30 to 35. Okay. 80 to 90%. That's the overwhelming percentage. We're done with their slave labor contract by the time they were 30 to 35. Okay. Compared to Gen Z, how long is Gen Z going to be? If you're a modern day Starbucks slave as Gen Z, yeah, are you going to be able to retire between 30 to 35? That's a rhetorical question, obviously. All right. Oh, so you need to go back to school to acquire a skill. Okay, let's see what happens when you do that. Okay, on average, it takes about 25 years to pay back student loans. Now, this isn't even factoring in that like college degrees are becoming more and more worthless with AI, but let's not even factor that. Let's actually be extremely generous to them and not even factor that at this point. Okay. On average, even if you get one of the better jobs that actually require a college degree, on average, it's going to take you 20, 25 years to pay off student loans in this day and age. It's probably going to get way worse because interest inflations are going to get worse by the time you actually, like, this is based on today's figures. But by the time you're actually 25 years into paying your student loans, you know the numbers are going to change. Okay. But let's just be very generous to them and give them all these figures at face value for now. Okay. Um, let's say you start working at Starbucks. Let's say you go to school, whatever. Let's just say, to be very generous, you can retire at 60 in this day and age, right? Very, very generous. Okay. You're retiring at 60. You're probably never going to own a house. Whereas for a Roman slave, when they were half that age, by the time they were 30 to 35, they were freed. They were freed. And I'll get into the economics a bit later. After you were freed as a Roman slave, you could generally own a house within a decade, maybe two. All right, because of the way the Roman economy functioned. There are many former slaves who went on to be wealthy and influential. Many, many. Probably not the majority, but a lot of them did. All right. So this kind of just proves how the modern day capitalist wage slave system is like, it's just so much worse because it gives you the illusion of freedom, the illusion of social upward mobility. But if you look at the actual historical facts and evidence, like you guys can see, am I tripping here? Does anybody not see what I'm seeing? Where, like, in theory, you're supposed to have more freedom and social upward mobility now, but in practice, an actual Roman slave had more social mobility and social upward mobility than you. These are all facts you're seeing right here. These are all numbers. I'm not making any of this up, you know. Fact check me if you want about this. Um yeah, look at the actual results, not, you know, what happens in theory, right? I would argue the absolute worst that can happen today is someone snapping and playing Counter-Strike in real life in local school, which is probably worse than whatever Rome had. Chris, you play Counter-Strike. You want to you want to
Yeah,
respond to that?
I kind of agree with that. I guess that would, yeah, that's probably.
Do people get super tilted in CS? Like, I know in League that's a problem. uh, okay. Um, yeah, it depends. Transatlantic, African, European, and Asian slavery. Yeah, yeah. We're not getting into all of that today. All right. Like, first of all, American slavery was, you know, capitalism as well, a direct result of capitalism. And yeah, if you want to argue slavery under capitalism is worse, I'm never going to contest you there. Trust me. Yeah, this is why specifically I'm only talking about Roman slaves, urban Roman slaves in this video, right? Because yeah, I think this is a valid historical comparison and a valid conversation to have. Okay, Chris, can you move to the next slide? Shoot, are you there, bro? Okay, yeah, yeah, perfect. I can't hear you, by the way, but I see you hear me. Okay, let's talk about the sixth or the fifth and final variable, which is the psychological aspect. Okay, guys, this is where Roman slavery beats modern slavery by an absolute massive landslide, total blowout. Like, sit all the starters out in the fourth quarter because you're already ahead by 30 points. Blowout. Okay. You guys are going to find this very relatable, I think. I certainly did because just the psychological toll of, like, not just modern slavery, but like of the societal pressures from your family, from, you know, from your peers, from other people. The sheer societal psychological pressures to be successful, to earn a high wage, right? Basically, to be a better wage slave than the next guy. Just totally inhumane, overwhelming because it attacks you from so many goddamn angles. compared to what Roman slaves had to deal with. So, okay, let's break this down. Okay, let's start with this. All right. We talked about Cicero in the beginning. One reason he specifically thought wage labor was so bad is because he immediately recognized it was slavery, okay? But the reason he went out of his way to condemn that and not even actual slavery he actually saw every day in his time, slaves who worked for wages actually didn't know they were slaves, right? Which is thankfully Gen Z is waking up to that fact today. But like most people still don't know they're slaves right now when they're working for a wage. All right. When you don't know the problem you're actually dealing with, that makes it worse on so many levels because the gaslighting, the confusion is just so insane. All right. It's like, okay, when we're talking about like medical diagnosis, if you have a disease, whatever it is, right? Even if there's not a great cure for it, when you know what the disease is, when you get a proper, actual, accurate diagnosis, that's so key to recovery. So key. Like so many problems with like, the medical field come within like because of misdiagnosis, right? Once you get an accurate diagnosis, even if there's not a perfect cure, an accurate diagnosis alone is such a game changer. Why? Because you have to know what the problem is if you want to be able to deal with it. Okay. All right. And that's what makes slave labor today so horrible, psychologically speaking, because you don't even know you're a slave. They've done it so insidiously. Gen Z's waking up to that, which is why, this channel's all about being a Gen Z defense lawyer. Yeah. But yeah, okay, you guys get the point. All right. When you don't even know what the problem is, it gets so much worse. And here's how it manifests, okay? Because in the modern day and age, all right, the pressures, the psychological burden of being a slave in the modern day and age, it doesn't just stop at your job. If you are a Starbucks slave, what do you have to deal with? Everybody knows this. You go home, your parents, why aren't you successful? Why aren't you rich yet? Why don't you have a house? Why aren't you married? Why aren't you making money? Your friend so and so, I know this kid your age, he's going to school, he's got a successful career doing this, that, and the other, right? Because you don't know you're a slave, because other people don't know and don't think you're a slave, they have expectations on you as if you are not a slave when you are. All right. When you were a Roman slave, people knew you were a slave. They only expected that of you. No one expected you to be rich or successful, right? No one put you in a position where it was impossible to become rich or successful, then demanded you become rich and successful. By the way, everyone thinks I'm a communist. I don't have anything against rich or successful people. I really, really don't. I just don't think it should come at the expense of the poor. And, you have to be a complete delusional moron to think that it doesn't in this day and age. So because no one expected Roman slaves to be rich or successful, right? That's a huge relief of burden, psychologically speaking. Like, imagine how big of a difference your life would be if, like, no one expected you to, right? Like, if you were working at Starbucks, yeah, but most people knew and understood the economy was just that bad, that there was no other realistic expectation for you, how much easier would that be for you psychologically, right? Yeah, it would still suck having to pay bills, having to pay these insane living costs. No one's denying that. But the psychological pressures on you to be better, richer, more successful when it's economically impossible for you to do so, yeah, that just exponentially compounds the problem way worse. No one viewed you as a loser, right? As a slave. I mean, you were looked down on, no doubt about that, right? But you weren't viewed as a loser economically speaking. Like, no one viewed you and thought you were just lazy, that you could have been something better if you worked harder. Your expectations were in line with reality. That's what I think Gen Z has to deal with, that no other generation in human history has to deal with, is people in the past definitely had challenging conditions, but their reality matched people's expectations of them. Okay. If you were a slave, your expectations were that of a slave. If you were an elite, your expectations were that of an elite. If you were average, your expectations, people didn't expect you to be more than average. Now, people shit on you. They give you horrible conditions. They put you in impossible positions where it's impossible to climb up. And then they shame you for not climbing up. Like, they throw you in a pit, they drag up the ladder, and then they call you a loser for not being able to climb up a ladder they pulled up. right? That's why psychologically, it's just so much more horrible today. No one compared you to other more successful slaves, right? Like, and that's really all it is. You know, it's just a bunch of like, you know, you guys know how this is. Like high school never ends, right? Like the manager at the job thinks he's better than you. You know, your friend who works a slightly better wage slave job, earning slightly higher wage. You know, he thinks he's better than you because he's a more successful slave. But you guys are the only one who wakes up and realizes you're all still slaves, right? Like you weren't being compared to other slaves and expected to like produce outputs as them, right? I mean, maybe it happened in like, you know, like I don't know, maybe occasionally it happened. Like some slave owner might have been at some point to a slave, oh, so and so slave next door is doing so much more work than you. Why can't you be like that? I don't know. That probably happened here and there occasionally, anecdotally, you know, in on an individual basis. It wasn't though like a macro overall feature of society. That's the difference, right? And it absolutely is today. Every one of you who you know, who's lived and experienced the economy now, like you know that's true. Um you know that's absolutely true. So so yeah, that I would say is the absolute worst reason. The absolute worst reason we have it worse today. This is where Roman slavery wins by a landslide. So yeah, Chris, can you go back to the six variables? The slide.
Yep, 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, we are there.
Okay. So I know where I messed this up because I first like separated size and scope into two different variables, but like I ended up combining it to one and forgot to change the 5 to the 6 later on. So that's why that's why it's the 6 variables and I actually list 5. I know it's a bad look. But that's what happened. That's to clarify the confusion there. So just to quickly recap, guys. So yeah, we have incentive structure, right? Like economic slavery, economic protections, and incentives, generally speaking, in life are going to be stronger than legal incentives and protections, right? Number one. Number two, size and scope, right? Straight up, even if you want to say the conditions were equally bad, because so many more people have to be slaves today, that makes modern slavery worse from a macro perspective. Okay. Peak cruelty is where I will give a concession to the modern day, where we have it better in the modern day, right? Again, being fair, honest, and objective here, right? Not pushing ideologies, not being biased, not trying to get clicks and views, trying my best to be honest and objective. This is one where we can give to modern society. All right. Not by much, though. Not really by that much. All right. I would say being beaten and tortured to death is only slightly better than, you know, getting cancer from your job and then your same job who gave you cancer throws you off health insurance and, you know, throws you out on the streets. Right. Only slightly worse than the one and only aspect where modern wage slavery has it better. Working conditions, Roman slavery wins by a landslide, right? You know, 6 hours per day compared to 10 to 12 now, 100 holidays per year compared to 2 to 6. Two weeks if you're in America, 6 if you're in Europe. And then yeah, Saturnalia, the festivals, like just by a landslide, working conditions were better for Roman slaves. And then yeah, finally, psychologically, again, Roman slavery wins in an absolute landslide here. This is not even close to debatable or contestable, in my opinion. The fact that like we're today put in modern slavery and we're expected to produce as if we're elites, all right, and we're gaslit, you know, put in invisible mental chains and expected to like the expectation reality gap is just so ridiculously wide compared to any at any point in history before. So yeah, those are so yeah, that's basically it, guys. Just to recap, yeah, those are the all the variables, all the reasons that I believe yeah, I hope I actually made well, I don't hope. I know I made a pretty good case about that. But what do you guys think? Like I think this was a pretty good case that not a clickbaity YouTuber case, an actual academically, historically grounded case that Roman slavery was probably much worse than modern day Starbucks slavery. Okay, I'll read the chat now, take some questions. Chris, you can play Claire Obscure now.
Okay, sounds good.
Sorry I didn't let you play much. I
It's-
kind of just got into the slideshow.
It's fine, I tuned
I
into a game.
know
I don't mind.
you've been meaning to play that game for a while. Okay, I'll go through the chat now, and yeah, let's discuss this. They didn't have crazy people with guns either. Yes, that's true. Okay. Let's start with by the way, the things that are said on this channel about narcissism, you're on point. Saw a very good video from Hermodorus Damius about social psychopathy from ancient Greek viewpoint. Yeah, I'm gonna have to get into the ancient Greeks one day. They didn't have it quite as good as the Romans, but you know, it's shockingly close to modern society. I think I should have invested in Bitcoin in 2006 when I was born. Exactly. That's literally like the standard, you know, like, yeah, you should have just bought a property. Like you should have basically just been born earlier. Like you should have, you know, you should have just been born rich. Like that's basically what all their arguments boil down to now. I'm going to contest you on the peak cruelty aspect. Today, the worst that can happen is someone snapping and taking lives of other people, which didn't happen in Rome. It did actually happen in Rome, to be fair. Like, there are cases where slaves got beaten to death. That did happen. Now, you could make the case that, like, you know, losing your life today is as bad, okay? Okay, so if your point is you're not contesting that it's worse, but you're going to say that it's as bad, okay, I think so. Although I would still say, like, today, you could probably, you know, you could probably get killed, but you're not going to, like, be tortured and killed. So I'm still going to say, to be fair, it's probably slightly better now, but not by much. And that's the whole point. Their one single best argument isn't even that great of an argument. Couldn't the slaves free themselves by making their own tools to produce what they need? Not exactly, because they were legally enslaved, but they could, you know, just buy their buy their freedom between the ages of 30 to 35, usually straight up via manumission. Fun fact, manumission actually happened a lot before the age of 30, but what happened was, like, so much of the slave population became freed at once so fast that the Roman economy couldn't absorb that many free people at once. So, like, an emperor came along one day. I forgot which emperor did this, but there was one emperor who came along one day and passed a law saying, okay, legally you have to wait till 30 to be to get manumission. But that just tells you, before they actually made that illegal law, it actually frequently even happened before the age of 30. All right, so that just tells you, yeah, you were often freed before 30. Like, it had to be by definition, otherwise there's no need to even make that law. So yeah, typically you're freed around the ages of 30 to 35 as a Roman slave. In the modern day and age, you know, you're not free till 60, 65, sometimes even not free for life, you know, like, yeah. I keep hearing the word narcissism. I don't know if the algorithm is calling me a narcissist or telling me I've been homeless for 15 years because I married a narcissist. I'm really sorry to hear that. I've heard so many countless stories of that. Like, it's, yeah, sad because, like, narcissists, they inherently rise to power because, like, they don't care about other people. And that's sadly the way society's structured. You know, we all hate it, but we all reward it because, you know, those are the only people who, you know, if you're just a normal, nice person, yeah, you don't have any incentive, any desire to control others. But if you're a bad narcissist, right, that's the main thing you want to do in life. And that's what the system rewards. Okay. They used to give out free land back in America back in the 1800s. You just had to sell. Yeah, that's the Homestead Act. I'm definitely going to have to get into that. That more proves the whole argument I made. Another argument I made, another topic. That like, land is free, right? They, like, the capitalist logic is, okay, nothing requiring the labor of another human is a human right. Yeah, like, you don't have the right to something. Like, for example, their logic is, okay, you don't have a right to free food because somebody else had to produce that free food. First of all, anthropologically, scientifically, that's false, all right? Hunter-gatherers were able to work get all their 2,300 to 3,000 calories per day off purely off their free resources of the land. It takes labor to get food now, but that's not because food takes requires labor naturally speaking. It's because we've terraformed, industrialized, ran over all the previous nature with industry. Back then, you go look up Tacopia, go look up, the Kung tribe. Like, they literally got like nuts, coconuts, trees, banana trees growing everywhere. Like, food literally just fell out of the sky for them, which is why, they were able to get 2 to 3,000 calories off 2 to 3 hours a day. But I'm getting carried away here. I don't want to make this about hunter-gatherers again. Back to what I was saying. Capitalist logic is nothing that requires the labor of another human is a human right, okay? So then, by their own logic, that by definition should mean if it does not require the labor of another human, then it should be a human right, yeah? Because you can only be logically consistent if you follow that path, okay? So, land scientifically, inherently, fundamentally does not require the labor of another human being. So why the hell are we paying for it? No human built, created, or they modified it, but no human built or created the land. That is a fact. The land was here. It existed billions of years before we did. All right. So it doesn't make any sense we have to pay to live on land that was created for free. Yeah, that's just a fact. Sorry, capitalists. Facts don't care about your feelings. I meant situations where someone snaps and proceeds to, how do I say this, play Counter-Strike. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, you can certainly make the case that that's worse than like, because like being beaten and tortured. Okay, let's back up a bit and really explore this. Technically, that's not a result of slavery, right? Wait, modern slavery. It is and it's not, because it's not something that happens directly at your workplace. Well, it certainly can.
Get ready.
So I even take that back. But even if we talk about it in the context of school shootings, right? It still generally happens because the person committing these, generally they're economically disenfranchised and stuff. Not always, right? Some people just are legitimately mentally ill, but generally I would say it happens because like people are economically pushed to the limit. Not that it justifies it, right? So nobody take it out of context. You should still never do that. There's no justifying it whatsoever. But we can acknowledge, the reasons it happens. I don't think it's the only reason that happens, but I do think economic pressures and, economic disenfranchisement is a big reason it happens. Not in every case, but in some cases. Though, I could be wrong about that. But, we can at least, let's say, meet somewhere in the middle about that. I know people 70 plus still working. Exactly. Roman slaves achieve freedom by the age of... Keep in mind this, too. If you know people who are 70 and working now, those are boomers, all right? Those are people who had a golden economy. They just mismanaged their money with excessive consumerism that every boomer had because they naively thought the great economic conditions they grew up in were going to last forever, okay? So if you know people who are 70 years old still working today, okay, it only means if things currently keep going on this current trajectory, by the time you hit 70, it's going to be even worse. You're going to even see more 70-year-olds working by then, unless something changes, right? Okay. They take their passports in Dubai. That's pretty slavery. Exactly. If you zoom out on a global standpoint, we're just talking about America, which is being very generous, right? If we zoom out globally speaking, yeah, slavery is even worse today because now you're talking about, legal personhood, legal rights are as bad. You still have economic pressures. Yeah, it's just uncontestable when you factor that in. Even if I knew how to make my own fire, build my log cabin, make what I need, the system would still force me back into society. So they are selling waters. The next step is auction. Exactly. Like people who say, oh, if you don't like society, just move into the woods. Well, you actually legally can't. Literally. I think like some Nordic countries have the right to roam laws. America doesn't. Most places don't. And that's still a dishonest, disingenuous argument because there's so very limited places you could go, right? Like before society and capitalism existed, like you could have like lived on like in Florida, right? Or in like a very lush tropical climate that had lots of natural food and resources. Those have all been taken over by cities and industrialization now, right? So even if that was the case, yeah, it's still a disingenuous argument because there used to be plenty of places that had tons of free, abundant resources. They've all gotten like ran over by cities and terraforming industries now. So it's like they remove, I think something like 70% of the world has been, you know, the land has been like either deforested, like run over by cities pretty much. Like 70% of the land on the earth isn't what it was when before humans and capitalism took over, right? So like they remove the overwhelming majority of places you could live for free, and then they tell you to just go live in the woods. It's such a stupid, dumb, dishonest argument, but you know, what else would you expect from a capitalist? Okay. I heard some Romans work much more than other Romans at certain jobs, just like now. Well, of course, like you know, there were obviously different professions and different types of work back then, just like there are, you know, in any era. Some are just workaholic control freaks. Oh yeah, exactly. And it's not a coincidence the number of Counter-Strike VR got higher the worse economics, life quality, and that is a very good point. Fantastic point. By the way, she's not talking about actual Counter-Strike here. She's talking about basically it's a very non-shadow banny way to say school shootings. I think we can talk about that on YouTube. I think shooting isn't a word that's banned, so I'm just gonna say it.
Yeah, it's more about TikTok.
That is true. What's that?
It's more about TikTok thing usually, but yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. If it was banned, like all of your Counter-Strike videos would be banned.
Yes, so, every CS stream would be banned.
Every like Valorant Counter-Strike game would be banned. And like, imagine trying to cast an esports game without being able to shoot. Like, he unalived him. He flew a bullet to him and head bulleted him. It'd be impossible. Yeah. Okay, so we can say shooting. Let's say. Yeah. I actually agree. That's a fantastic point. It's probably not. I know conservatives are going to say it's all a mental health thing. I believe in some cases it's mental health, right? Like we did have school shootings before the economy went to shit too. But it did get significantly worse after the economy went to shit. Like when I was in high school, you know, this was before all this crazy shit happened with the economy. If a school shooting happened, it was like news, like, you know, it was a big deal. I mean, it still is now, but like a lot of it gets swept under the rug because it happens so often. And it's like now I heard like Gen Z grew up having to do like school shooter drills in high school. Like we didn't have to do any of that shit when I was in high school, you know? So yeah, we could say majority of the time it is causation. That is a fantastic point. You're right about that. All right. It's not always the case, but I do think most of the time, yeah, you're absolutely right that, like, you know, school shootings went up a lot since the economy started getting worse. Not that it justifies it, right? You know, so, you know, before some idiot like takes my words out of context, he's saying it's okay so long as because it's the no, like, no matter how bad the economy is, it doesn't justify being a school shooter, and you should definitely not do that. Okay, but we can't acknowledge that it's a factor, right? We can be honest about that. Okay. All right, let me read. Okay, that's exactly why I cannot let myself end up like that. I'm saving money, and my goal is to start a business before 25 so I can get a head start. Honestly, that's really your only option, I'd say, as a young person today, because everything else they tell you is bullshit, straight up. You're not going to get ahead working for a wage. You're not going to get ahead, you know, studying for college in most cases. Even if you get a degree that's in a relevant field, like we don't know what the labor market's going to look like when AI and robots take over. And, you know, we all know how bad student debt is. Less of an issue if you're in Europe, and I don't want to like also I know a lot of you are a global audience. You know, we have a lot of European audiences as well. I'm not trying to discount you. I'm just saying because the situation's worse in America, yeah, especially with the school debt. you know, it's a more visceral example. That's why I'm using the American example here. Far from like a America-centric guy. Okay. The problem is work with okay, let me back up a bit. Bro, people unironically thought I was gonna be a school shooter. I'm gonna be honest, the school system is breeding shooters. The despair, the hate. I remember how I felt back then, and it was bad. Well, I'm glad you didn't become one. And it's like, okay, we have to have an honest dialogue about it if we actually want to prevent it, right? Like if we just, you know, close our eyes and pretend the problem's gonna go away, it's just gonna get worse. So yeah, we do have to have an honest conversation about why it's happening and acknowledge how to like mitigate some of these factors, because it's really horrible, you know. The problem with work is that there's no leverage with the 9 to 5. There's only 24 hours in a day. You have to sleep 8, commute 1, work 10 to 12, and you can't rent more time. There's no, oh yeah, you can't rent more time. There's no leverage. Exactly. Now, to be fair, Roman slaves didn't have much leverage either, yeah, but they did have, you know, the option to buy their freedom at 30. So it's like, okay, if I were to tell you, you know, all the shit sucks, yeah, but you only have to do it till you're 30, then you can buy your freedom. A lot of you would take it. I would. I'm at the age I would have already been a free man if I was, you know, if I was a slave in ancient Rome. And a lot of you will probably be there soon. Not that it matters, because unfortunately we're not Roman slaves. That sounds really funny, but everything I said in this video kind of proves that. Okay. Let's see some more comments here. Someone says, I remember doing those school shooter drills back in elementary school. I was unaware of what was happening in the US till I was like 8th grade. That's crazy. God, that has to be so psychologically scary as like an elementary school kid having to deal with that. Ooh, can't imagine. How are the kids getting easy access? Like, do the parents just not lock up their guns to keep active? I would say the majority of gun owners are responsible, and they do lock up their guns well, but it only takes one to forget to do it, and, you know, and it's over, right? Yeah. Therefore, in Rome, at least slaves weren't miserable enough to take it out on other innocent slaves, so modern society is more cruel. I rest my case. Woo! That is a great point. Oh my goodness, that's a great point. Oh my goodness, that's a great point. How did I not think of this? I'm supposed to be the philosophical one. You're embarrassing me here. No, I'm just kidding. That's such a fantastic point, because think about it this way, right? Think about what you're saying here, right? You had the Spartacus Rebellion back then, which was slaves gathering together as an uprising against the elites, yeah? But you didn't have slaves beating the shit out of, killing and, you know, maiming and, you know, taking it out on other slaves. The psychological element of modern slavery is so devastating. It's gotten modern day slaves to take it out on other slaves, right? Imagine if Roman slavery was so bad that like a slave was so psychologically broken, he went around and committed a mass killing of like 12, 15, 20 other slaves, right? We would look at that and think, God, it must have been horrible back then. But because it happens in the modern day, we don't make that connection. And I didn't either till just now. But that's such a good point. Modern slaves are pushed to such an insane limit. And yes, a lot of it is due to economic pressures, right? Because these school shootings, it's not like they didn't exist before the economy went to shit, but they did go up substantially after the economy went to shit. So in this aspect, it's a very, very visceral argument that modern slavery is way more cruel, because our slaves are getting pushed to such an insane limit psychologically. They're not even rebelling against the elites and killing the elites. They're actually killing other slaves. Crazy. Chris, what do you think of that take? I know you're just an editor. If this is like something you don't want to touch, just feel free to say you don't know comments. But do you have any comment about that? Actually,
I was locked into the game. Can you like brief me in for a bit?
Yeah, sure. So basically, Miss K made a great point that like in in ancient Rome, the slaves never got miserable to a point where they mass killed other innocent slaves. Okay. In modern society, like people are pushed to such economic stressful limits that they actually go and shoot up a school. So that's actually, I think, a great case to be made that like modern slavery is psychologically so much more awful.
No, that's rude. I don't even know where I stand with it. I actually agree with like the logical premise of it, but I just don't. Yeah. I just don't want to form.
If you don't want to touch it because it's just too much of a hot, controversial topic, that's fine. But
yeah, I just don't think I can add much. Honestly, I just don't think I can have much good input on it.
Fair enough. But that is at least an interesting point, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, I haven't thought about that at all.
Yeah, I didn't think about that either. But holy shit, that's such a good point. I might even have to make a video about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I'm in Canada, never seen a shooting, have had a few break-ins though, lots of thieves here. Well, the reason, yeah, you've never seen a shooting, which is why you're able to comment here about it. If you saw a shooting, it's already too late, yeah? Like, there's not many people, well, okay, some people survive shootings, but I hope you realize the irony in that statement, like, you know, the fact that you've never seen a shooting yet, that doesn't prove the system is working. That just proves that, like, you know, you're like, that just proves that, like, by definition, you've never seen a shooting if, you know, you exist to talk about how you've never seen a shooting, right? Great argument I can share with my friends. Absolutely. As a hedonist, it always makes me sad that people call me lazy and tell me that hedonism is evil and contributing to society is the only moral thing to do, and it makes me sad. I mean, society has to like give you a reason to contribute.
We've had enough.
Right? If we're gonna live under modern capitalist incentive,
That's a yes.
an incentive viewpoint of the world, society needs to give people a free market incentive to contribute. Yeah. If it's not doing that, then by capitalist own logic, it should fail. Okay. Please tell me your opinion on Catholic medieval Europe, Islamic world where usury was banned and society was far more cohesive and virtuous. I don't know enough about the Islamic world. I will have to look into that because I read that there was like a Islamic golden age, which is life was probably better back then than it is now too. Catholic medieval Europe, I think so. The religion is like something I'm going to contest a bit. One reason I read ancient Rome had better technological advancement was because there wasn't a single religious dogma or institution that dominated throughout the empire. They had many competing institutions, so there was a lot of like room for discourse, for discussion, for debate on like how best to advance society. Whereas because in medieval Europe everybody subscribed to like one single religious dogma, it didn't open up as much room for like discourse, discussion, and like healthy disagreements that would push society forward. Medieval peasants did work less than us. I don't think, to be fair, overall their lives were better than ours, because just technology was so much worse back then. This changes with the Roman Empire though, because the Roman Empire had insanely good technologies far ahead of their time. So I would actually say I'll do this one day where you know, I'll do a whole tier list on how good Gen Z actually has it compared to the majority of history. I would say, to be fair, we have it better than medieval peasants. I wouldn't say we have it better than the average Roman citizen. Well, we don't even have it better than a Roman slave, as I just made the whole video about. So yeah. Okay. Okay, let's see. I'll read a couple more comments here. Chris, let's go for about 10 more minutes. Is that good with you?
All right. Sounds good, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take a couple more comments here. A lot of our old myths were there to guide morality, but never through force or threat. They just helped develop it. Now hard rules and punishments are set. No room for inner evolution. Yeah, and most of it is through economic coercion. Yeah. And, as we talked about in the beginning, generally speaking, economic, sorry guys, I've been talking. If I lose my voice a bit, that's why. But yeah, generally speaking, economic coercion is going to be more powerful than legal coercion.
So you didn't just stay in your mansion.
Back then, people could just leave. Now we have nowhere to go. Yeah, very true.
That anchor doesn't look man-made.
Okay. America had 2 golden ages, 50s and 90s. Yeah, I was there for the 90s, I remember. I totally agree. Yeah. But they're long gone now. I understand why we work, but working hours, working extreme hours is bad. Japanese even have a term called karoshi, which means death from overwork. You should do a video on this, actually. Yeah, I've seen and heard about it. It's a real thing, a very real thing. I understand your opinion that on that philosophical, but there's a lot of agenda on medieval Europe coming also from the system. I recommend checking Medieval Mindset. I have seen his channel. I will say, like, yeah, the Middle Ages, like, was probably better than, like, what capitalist and modern day, like, boomers try to claim it was when they, oh, you kids have it better than anyone in history. Like, it's not as bad as boomers make it out to be, but I wouldn't quite say, to be fair, medieval people had it better than us. In all fairness and objectivity, right? Roman Empire, ancient Romans for sure had it better than us. Hunter-gatherer, okay. I'll just do a quick historical comparison here. If I had to do a fair historical, as someone who's studied a lot of history for my videos, as you know, okay, I don't just say blanket statements like we have it better than now in history. I actually research historical eras, okay? So if I were to do an objective like list and comparison, I would say, okay, hunter-gatherers, pretty indisputable they had it better than us. Like, any anthropologist will tell you that. Like, they live shockingly better than you think. So I would say, like, hunter-gatherers had it better than us, which is majority of human existence. After agriculture started, okay, early days of agriculture, probably from like 10,000 BC to the beginning of the Roman Empire, those people definitely had it worse than us. Because agriculture fucked up so much shit about humanity, which I made that's a whole nother rabbit hole. So we'll say like 3000 BC to 10,000 BC, pretty much everyone had it better than us. All right. To be fair, probably from 10,000 BC to the Roman Empire, people had it worse than us. Then from the Roman Empire, throughout the course of the Roman Empire, I would say, maybe not the whole Roman Empire. All right. But certainly, at least during the best parts of the Roman Empire, people had it better than us. Yeah, generally speaking, I would say ancient Romans had it better than us. Medieval peasants probably had it worse than us. I would say then yeah, if you move on to history towards early American settlers may have had it better than us. Then an industrial revolution, that's when actually capitalism really took its full hold in the world. And yeah, under capitalism, especially early unfettered real capitalism, as they say, for sure they had it worse than us. And then when you get to the boomer era, they had it better than us. So yeah, to be fair, you go through the historical eras, like, it's very nuanced, but it's very stupid, brain dead, and historically illiterate to just automatically assume everyone in the past had it harder than us. Okay, moving on here, some more comments. Yeah, we'll answer some more questions for about 5-6 minutes here, then wrap up this live stream. Pros and cons of every age, exactly. I think traditional religion is probably one of the best things to structure your society because of how much cohesion, virtue, brotherhood it creates alongside deep peace of spirit. I think it can be good. I don't think it's the only way to do it. Like, the ancient Roman Empire was specifically advanced for its time because it didn't have like a singular focused religion the way the Middle Ages had. It had a lot of other very organized structures that did similar things though. And because they had to compete against each other with ideologies, debate, how to best run society, like, you got a lot of great honest discourse. And that's why the Roman Empire and the Greeks before them produced so many incredible philosophers. I'm personally not religious. I'm not anti-religious. I don't, hate people for being Christian automatically like a lot of people do now. But I don't think it's like certainly it's not the answer for a lot of things in modern society, though I can understand, you know, the temptation to try to find some sort of semblance of an anchor in this chaotic world we live in. A lot of the work related costs would go away if we had remote working. No gas, no car payment, no city rent. You should make a video about it. Absolutely biggest scam ever. Like, we're forced to pay so much monetarily just for the cost of working that never existed at any time in history before. What would you say to people working 2 to 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours, as if you were a hunter-gatherer, right? 2 to 3 jobs just to survive. Think about that. Hunter-gatherers work 2 to 3 hours per day. We have to work 2 to 3 jobs. 2 to 3 hours compared to 2 to 3 jobs, guys. Working 2 to 3 hours, 2 to 3 jobs just to survive. Personally, I tell them, well, where do you find all the hours to work in a day? As I said, I can't rent more time since it's not scalable. Yeah. Oh, you said people wanting you to work 2 to 3 jobs to survive. I would tell them to fuck off. Straight up. I would tell them to bugger off. I would tell them there's no fucking reason anybody should ever have to work 2 to 3 jobs. And here's a great economic argument you can make for that. All right. One job should pay you enough for a living, because if one job doesn't pay you enough for a living, okay, someone else has to subsidize your living. You have to eat. Even the ancient Romans, slaves understood, like slave masters understood this. You have to eat and have somewhere to live to even be a functional worker. All right. If you're starving, if you're homeless, you can't be a functional, working, productive member of society. All right. You can't like work well, even in a corporate setting, even if you're like on the streets, homeless and smelly clothes, you know, and you're hungry and starving, right? So if the corporation, your employer, is not going to pay you enough to have food and housing and basic living expenses met, well, someone is. Someone's going to have to subsidize them. Someone's going to have to subsidize their labor costs that they themselves should be responsible for paying, right? Because these loser corporations can't pay you enough. They can't cover their own cost of labor. So we, the taxpayer, have to subsidize them. So for example, just about every Walmart and Amazon employee is on food stamps right now. And we blame the individual hilariously. We don't blame the corporation for not paying them enough. And here's where the ultimate paradox and irony comes in. You and I, if we can't pay enough to cover our own rent, we as individuals in a capitalist framework, we're expected to be responsible to pay for our own living expenses of rent, right? Rent and food, okay? So if we're expected to pay our own rent and our own living costs, should corporations be responsible for paying their own labor costs that they signed up for of labor? Or should the rest of society be expected to subsidize their labor, right? Because if they can't pay for food and shelter for their workers, then the rest of society has to subsidize their labor costs, which is why so many, you know, Amazon and Walmart employees are on food stamps. I do agree that Roman Empire was not the worst, and that alongside ancient Greece had a lot of amazing philosophical background with which both Christian, Islamic, and even Hindu philosophers were influenced by. Yeah. Telling an unemployed person to get a job is like telling a homeless person to get a house. Yeah, exactly. Stupid, idiotic, moronic boomer advice. Okay, I'll take about 2, maybe 3 more comments, and then we'll wrap with this live stream. Thank you guys so much for participating. By the way, this was fantastic. It was a lot of fun to do. A lot of you raised a lot of great points. I honestly expected probably more pushback, but I think probably like the main feedback I got from you guys was actually I didn't take it far enough, which is that's just hilarious at this point. But you guys make a great point. Okay, let's see. Even when I was a kid, I thought we worked a ridiculous amount and suspected we worked less in the past before corporate hell. Yeah, and that's just a verifiable historical fact now. We need people making 3 figures to realize they have more in common with the homeless person. I know, right? The amount of them that will defend billionaires is crazy. Wild how literally nobody will address my point that revolution is never accomplished without violence. Well, it's not that I don't want to address your point. It's that because, like, we're not allowed to talk about that on YouTube. Yeah, that's just it. And to be fair, like, is there a platform? I don't want to like promote violence. I think there's better ways to do it. I legitimately think that, even outside of YouTube guidelines. But like, yeah, YouTube's actually been very good to me. They've been very gracious. They've let me yap more than I ever expected. So I don't want to push it too much by, I wouldn't advocate violence anyways. I don't think it's the answer. And I especially can't do that. And that's more than fair enough. Like if they're going to let me yap about wage slavery and all this bullshit about corporations and society, it's a more than fair compromise that it's like, okay, at least you can't like try to openly advocate for violence, right? So fair enough. Rome wasn't built in a day. Yeah, now you literally know what that term means. Big difference is slaves had slave wives. A little more complicated than you think, but generally quite true. Yeah. Unless your name is Hassan. Are we talking about Hassan Piker, or what is that referring to? Cool. Cool. All right. Yeah. Got a lot of great comments, great discourse. Funny enough, most of you actually didn't think I took it far enough. But yeah, I think all of you can see and agree now how, like, yeah, literal ancient Roman slaves, not just clickbait, not just hyperbole, not just like a YouTuber trying to be sensationalist dramatic at this point. You've seen all my actual historically evidence-based points that, yes, Roman slavery was not as bad as being a modern-day Starbucks slave, or really any modern-day wage slave right now, especially for Gen Z and millennials. Like, and it's important to know this because, the first step towards freeing yourself, is to know how bad the problem actually is, right? Like, you have to actually know this is why Cicero said, like, modern, like, not modern, but he said wage slavery was so psychologically debilitating, is because it sets people up in a very, like, a very sort of dangerous and insidious evil illusion where not only are they slaves, but they don't even know they're slaves. And that is the worst type of slavery, psychologically speaking, and maybe even overall speaking. Okay, I think that's it. We can wrap up this live stream, guys. Oh, well, okay. We love you, brother, philosophical gamer. May God bless you, grant you well-being and success. Really helped me out in the worst time, and thanks God I'm here now. Right back at you guys. I so appreciate comments like this. This channel started out just as, oh, I'm just a guy complaining about society. But I've read more and more in your comments that I've helped you through dark times. Some of you said, I've helped you through depression. Some of you, even one guy even told me the other day that, like, he actually, chose not to unalive himself because of my content. So it's so humbling. So I'm so appreciative. I'm really nothing without you guys. You guys have given me the privilege myself to work the way I want, to escape wage slavery myself. And, the least I can do is try my best to help you guys do the same and return the favor. And I got a lot more good news, a lot of like direct impact ways that I'm going to be sharing with you guys to help you do that. Coming very soon. A lot of exciting announcements to make. So yeah, stay tuned. Okay, Chris, don't hang up just yet. Let's I wanted to just discuss a couple things with you real quick, maybe 5 minutes after we end the live stream.
Sounds good. Yep.
Yeah. But yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. Hopefully this opens your eyes a bit. You can share this with your boomer parents. Share this with everybody who, reacts disgustingly when you compare like modern wage slavery to like traditional slavery. You can easily make the case, not only can you compare it, you can easily make the case at least it was worse than Roman slavery. It might not have been worse than non-Roman forms of slavery because let's just there's no good way to say this, but Romans probably did slavery better than everyone else. Probably a better way to say this would be every other form of slavery was so much worse than Roman slavery, right? Like there's no good form of slavery, yeah? But like just speaking from pure factually point of view here, Modern slavery, way worse than Roman slavery. We explore 5 reasons why in depth. Yeah. Share this with anyone who wants to question you, and hopefully we can build a better future together. Once we know we're actually slaves and the best problems were the best problem, all the real problems we're dealing with. Cool. Reed Sterner, will do. Will do. It's just hard to find books on him, but yeah, I promise I'll get around to it. Okay, yeah, have a good day, night, wherever you guys are. And yeah, I'll see you all next time. Check out this video right here for more. No, just kidding. That's my usual outro, but just, yeah. We'll end it with have a good night, day, wherever you are. Thank you all so much for tuning in. See you.
Thank you for
Okay.
watching.
Yeah, yeah, feel free to end the stream, and then, yeah, we'll talk a bit.
Yep. See you guys.